Today, we're going to dive into the very foundation of how we study law. Now, this analysis is based on the work of Professor Kiskinov, and it tackles a really fundamental question. What exactly are legal scientists studying? As you'll see, the answer is a lot more complex and, frankly, more surprising than you might think.
So, let's start with this central problem that Professor Kiskinov points out. When legal scholars try to focus on the pure blueprints of the law, just the system of rules itself, they often get accused of being ivory tower academics, totally disconnected from the real world. But what we're going to explore is why understanding this abstract core is absolutely essential to seeing how law really works, and, more importantly, how it can go wrong.
All right, here's our plan for this journey. First, we'll pinpoint the law's unseen core. Then, we're going to uncover where this system actually exists, which is a big surprise. After that, we'll look at the real-world consequences of its nature, check out a proposed solution for a more objective system, and finally, see how this could spark a whole new paradigm for legal science.
So let's get right to it. What is really at the heart of all legal phenomena? What's the engine driving everything from a parking ticket to the most complex constitutional debate?
The key here is that legal researchers don't just study one rule at a time. They study the entire interconnected system of legal norms. And pretty much all scholars agree that this system is the fundamental thing they're studying. You can think of it as the invisible architecture that holds up the entire legal world.
And this really requires a major shift in how we think. A simple command like "do not steal" is easy enough. But what about the massive, tangled web of rules that govern something like a criminal trial, or how laws are even made in the first place? The sheer complexity of our modern world means we have to move beyond looking at individual bricks and start analyzing the entire building.
And that brings us to the real bombshell in Professor Kiskinov's work. Okay, so if this system is what we're studying, we have to ask a really simple question: where is it? And trust me, the answer is not at all what you'd expect.
This table just brilliantly lays out the huge difference between legal science and something like physics. A physicist studies the universe. That's an objective reality that's just out there, waiting to be found. But a jurist's objective study, this system of legal norms, it doesn't exist out there at all. It has to be constructed. It's subjective. And its location is internal.
So let's break that down, because this is huge. The system of law isn't a thing that was just discovered. It's an idea built piece by piece through the mental effort of every single lawyer, every judge, every lawmaker. It exists only inside their individual consciousness. There's no central server, no shared cloud where the true legal system lives. Every person is building their own version of it in their head.
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is all very philosophical, but does it really matter? Well, let's dig into why this seemingly abstract problem has incredibly tangible, real-world consequences. If the law is just a bunch of subjective models in people's heads, what does that mean for justice?
This question gets to the heart of the problem. Think about it this way. If two engineers are building a bridge, they share one single objective blueprint. They can both point to it and agree. But if two judges are interpreting a law, they are working from two separate internal blueprints inside their own minds. How on earth can we be sure they're even looking at the same thing?
This is how legal communication works, and you can see right away it's a fundamentally flawed process. A lawmaker has this complex, nuanced idea in their head, then they try to capture it using something as clumsy and ambiguous as written text. Then, a judge reads that text and tries to rebuild the original idea in their head. It's basically a game of telephone, and with each step, detail, quality, and accuracy are lost.
And the results are exactly what you'd expect. When everyone's working from a slightly different mental model, the outcomes become inconsistent. One police officer enforces a law differently than another. Two judges looking at very similar cases can come to completely opposite conclusions. And what you get is a legal system that can feel unpredictable and sometimes just plain arbitrary.
So the big question is, are we just stuck in this subjective trap? Well, not necessarily. And this brings us to a really fascinating potential solution for escaping this, let's call it a cognitive prison.
The solution really requires a radical shift in thinking. For centuries, the goal has always been to write clearer legal texts, but Professor Kiskinov argues that the new goal has to be to build a shared, external, and objective model of the legal system itself, a single, universal blueprint that everyone can work from.
So how do we actually do that? By developing what are called typified abstract structures. You can think of these as standardized templates or matrices.
So instead of every lawyer just imagining what a contract is from scratch, legal science would provide a formal universal model of a contract, and then specific contracts would be built using that shared consistent foundation.
Now, of course, to make this reality, we need a whole new toolkit. We need those standard models. We need agreed-upon methods for how to use them. We need a precise, standardized language to describe them. And maybe most importantly, we need a common place for them to exist that's outside of anyone's head, like a specialized information system.
You see, this new approach doesn't just fix a technical issue. It completely transforms the entire relationship between legal theory and legal practice. It literally turns law from an act of interpretation into an act of engineering.
And this new cycle is just brilliant. Legal theory is no longer just some abstract commentary from the sidelines. It actually provides the practical tools, the models. Then, lawyers and judges use these tools out in the real world. And the data from those real-world outcomes flows back to the theorists, which allows them to refine and improve the models. It becomes a living, learning system.
And just like that, legal science is no longer stuck debating abstract philosophies. It becomes an empirical discipline. Suddenly, we can objectively measure which legal structures produce the most consistent, the most efficient, and the most just outcomes, all because every practitioner is finally working from the same shared model.
This slide really sums up the monumental shift we've been talking about. We move from an endless, subjective interpretation of texts to the collaborative, objective engineering of structures. The object of study moves from inside our heads to an external model we can all see. And theory goes from being abstract and disconnected to being empirical and totally integrated with practice.
Which leaves us with this final, very powerful thought. Law isn't some natural phenomenon we discovered, like gravity. It's a technology. It's something we invented to organize ourselves. And like any technology, it can be flawed, but it can also be improved. So the real question isn't whether we can build a better system, but whether we have the will to start engineering one.